Good morning and good afternoon, good night, wherever you're in the part of the world. Welcome to this webinar about ISO, management systems and climate change. Today also we have a fantastic case study with Kate Wright. Hi, Kate, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for
Where are
inviting
you
me.
now?
I'm in Australia.
Oh, wow. Well, and I'm flying over Zurich, so we are well connected.
There you go.
So welcome everyone. If you have questions, we have a questions and answer box, and also you can stick them on the chat. Any admin questions, Julie from the IIRSM is also here. So please, just put your questions, comments, etc., over the chat or the Q&A box. Without further ado, I get on with the subject of the day. So what we're going to speak today is about how ISO standards help companies and organizations of all types to engage with the climate change. As many of you will know, in ISO 14001 environmental management systems, at the start of this year, there was a change in which before climate change was not in the standard. Now it is, and you have to demonstrate some kind of evidence in which you're doing something for it. We're going to go a bit on the basics. I'm going to try to speed through these because I don't know who is the public, but always the basics are always good to touch upon. The ISO is the International Standards Organization headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, about 4 hours from where I am now. They are an organization that has a permanent staff, but also is supported by several volunteers of people that works in standards in their own countries. All the standards are made through a consensus building process with experts on the field, and everyone gets together to create these standards that can apply to any organization in any country, in any size type of organization, and in any business. The management systems are a systematic way in which you can do things in your company and take control of it. So let's say, for example, that you have a company with 3 people. You will allocate responsibilities. Each one of us will do something different. There will be a way in which we communicate with each other. Those are the basics, right? So a management system, what they try to do is to systematize that. And especially when you have big companies operating in different countries of the world, in different markets, with different languages, etc., etc. It's a structured approach. It allows you to find the risks and opportunities that you may have. And also you have clear guidelines about what is that the standard requires you and what is what you have to do for yourself in your own organization. It is goal-driven, which means that slowly you will improve. You will learn from your mistakes. You will learn from your incidents. And that is a really powerful tool when you do it in a structured, honest, and transparent way. It helps regulatory compliance. It doesn't make you regulatory compliant. The difference is, while you have to check legislation, while you have to constantly ensure that you know what is the legislation that applies to your business, by knowing it, you are not complying with it, right? But at least you're on top of it. It organizes the processes, policies, and procedures. It tries to support efficiency and the quality of the outcomes in a company. The most famous ones are quality and environment. Those take, the major part of the certifications worldwide. But there are really other interesting standards. There are thousands of them, from the most crazy things that you can think. Even if you see your electric toothbrush, it will have an ISO. All of them will have an application for one part of a business, product, service, etc. One of the interesting ones is ISO 26000, that is a sustainability management of organizations, which is not a standard, it's a guideline. However, there are some companies that now are doing a type of a standard where you can be third-party certified, so certified by external auditor for organizations. And there are a number of standards that really help your company to focus on certain aspects of it and systematize, whereas quality, environment, occupational health and safety may cover the whole organization. To January 2023, this was the quantity of standards that they are published and ready to go. There are also standards in the making by technical committees. And there is a very interesting webinar from the IIRSM that I encourage you to see. It's from the 30th of March last year. It is Integrating Risks and ISO. It's another webinar that could be complementary to this if you're interested. Now, here, look at the number of certificates and the number of sites. The quality, by far, is the biggest one. Environment, it has passed the 500,000 mark. And then occupational health and safety is one of the most. Obviously, later you have food safety, which is a specific to an industry. Medical devices, same. Energy is a general standard, any organization, but it is encouraged for big energy consumers. And then you have a very interesting standard, anti-bribery, business continuity, and security management. One of the 20,121 sustainable events is used by the big bands that tour around the world, and they certify their events or their tours to be more sustainable through the actions that they take while doing it. So let's go to the basics of climate change. So the greenhouse effect is something normal. It happens in the Earth for millions of years, and that's what makes this planet livable in comparison to other planets of the system. So what happens? The sun radiates to the Earth. There is some of it that is radiated back to space. Some of it stays in the atmosphere and is reflected several times, which gives a constant temperature to a planet where life thrives. What happened with man-made climate change is that certain particles get trapped in the atmosphere, which means that more of the sun is reflected into the surface of the Earth, which gradually has changed the temperature or the average temperature, and that has melted the polar caps, and that makes, a change in temperature. So we know that the temperature has changed, is man-made climate change, chiefly by burning fossil fuels for all the activities. One, energy, and second, transport, logistics, whatever you can think. That has actually a major effect on the atmosphere. There are also substances that slowly through the years, as they discovered that the impact was so huge, we actually have been banning them. By banning the substances, the warmth on Earth has been controlled a bit. So here we have the trend of the average change of temperatures. As you can see, the Arctic and the Antarctic are zones of concern because those are ice sheets. Ice sheets not only work as a regulator of temperature, but they also reflect much more sun than the other regions because of being white, they reflect much more. If you have less ice cover, that means that you have less reflection, which means more sunlight stays on Earth and the warming continues. Now, the greenhouse effect is quite normal, as I said before. So you have a period of decay, autumn, and a period of growth, spring, and that is the opposite on both hemispheres. Through that, we have regulated the temperature through years. And add to that volcanic activity. Volcanic activity has been up and down. That's why the records maybe from thousands and millions of years ago are very different to what we know now. However, those particles actually have helped through the process to warm the Earth to the level that we need it to for life to thrive. To understand climate change is here we have a graph of what is reconstructed and what is observed. Since the Industrial Revolution onwards, especially through the burning of coal and extraction of petrol and the process of petrochemicals, we actually have increased the average temperature on Earth. We are en route to a change that will be anywhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees. The objective is to be net neutral by 2050, and that is through incremental improvements in technology and efficiency that we can have between now and then. However, the changes of 1.5 to 2 in average actually are very different in effects. So in some areas, it will mean desertification. In some areas where you had jungle, maybe you are going to have now a forest that they absorb much less carbon. So all these considerations we have to have them, and especially when we analyze the supply chain where things come from. Economic activities are the biggest, let's say, culprit of it, but they have other positive. Through the economic activities, we have been able to lift people out of poverty. We have supported countries to come into the value chain, and with that, we have constructed a much fairer society in many places. At the same time, burning fossil fuels exacerbates the greenhouse effect, and that is through the greenhouse gases. So that is several of them: CO2, methane, volatile organic compounds, sulfur dioxide, etc. So there are 6 major gases that we control to try to understand what is the effect that they're having in our atmosphere. Water vapor is another one that changes the temperature of the atmosphere and changes the chemical composition, helping or not helping the attachment of certain particles to the ozone layer. So that actually has an effect in climate change. Now, water vapor, for example, is the byproduct of several industrial activities. To put an example, nuclear plants, what comes from the stack is water vapor, in some cases at high temperature, which has an effect in global warming. There is also other trends that we have to consider, right? There is a changing world. Places are become more urban. We are more humans. The level or the rate of growth has been exponential. Now we're arriving to a flat line in certain areas where actually population is decreasing. Then we have other continents such as Asia and Africa that they're growing much faster than the average Europe, North America, and so on. And then you have the growth of the middle class, which attached to it takes consumerism. The middle class demands products, services, more often, and we are in a culture of use and throw, and that, sadly enough, actually has a major effect in the planet. And the land system changes that consumerism requires. So the average temperatures could actually change a lot of things for us, and this is also something that organizations have to start thinking, from not being able to go to work, to having heat stroke, to maybe have to change the hours of work. In some countries where heat is extreme, companies may have a different timetable, making people to work from 6 to 2, or different dynamics about what products you can get at times of the year. The average day, so the graphic here is showing the annual hottest day temperature change average. So if any place, like in 2050, we're looking at a world of more or less 4 degrees average over, that would mean that 7 degrees over can change completely the way many of these countries live. So let's center now on what is the impact in organizations. The disruption by climate events can be diverse, and it will change in the place on the earth where are you and the time of the year that you're. So maybe in England, they will get more moderate winters, but at the same time, that has an effect on the dryness and the availability of water. Who knows? And the same is for the certification and the advancement of it, in which is now impacting Southern Europe. The certification is very difficult to reverse, so that is a very dangerous precedent. There is some companies that they have become uninsurable. So if you are in a place where it has received flooding or landslides or whatever that didn't happen regularly, and it was not in the insurance models, many companies have received a letter saying, sorry, we cannot insure you because in the last 10 years, there were 7 events of flooding. And now, it's just impossible for us to insure you. So what are those companies to do? There is an increase of regulations, so you will have to put more money for compliance. There will have to be the governance structures in organizations to be able to deliver on those regulations and that compliance. The investor funding decisions are switching. Many investors not only are checking what is the return on investment monetarily, but also what is the impact. And they're looking into companies. For example, here in Switzerland, we have a bank called Radicant that every time I use my card or every time I do an investment, it will tell me what is the SDG score of my investment or expenditure. So if I choose a local baker, maybe the impact will be lower, but in some indicators, but higher in others, etc., etc. So very interesting how that is changing and creating new markets as well. Greenwashing. Many companies may put claims out there that may not be at all true. If that comes to the fore, that would be brand value and reputation. But greenwashing also has changed a lot. In a world of major scrutiny with social media, with journalism, etc., where we have never had access to so much information, many companies are afraid to report because they don't know what is the backlash that is going to come into that. If you're successful, people just read that, and some people decide not to believe you. So how do you do that? So what's happening now is that we have greenwashing, companies not reporting because they're afraid what is going to do, if that information is going to do damage if it's out there. And especially your achievements in climate change or whatever you can do, especially when the changes are gradual, slow, or you may have even negative numbers for a year to report. That can create also some bad publicity that you don't want to have. But at the same time, how do we do it if it's not reporting? The supply of raw materials and maybe parts of the value chain that may be affected by climate change, products that you may have before had more availability during the year, they're lower availability. That means, prices go up. Innovation, technologies that can change between now and 2050, and how that supports an organization to help or support impacts in climate change, to reduce the impact, of course. Stakeholder demands. Stakeholders, as I mentioned just now, they have access to information, and the way they choose to interpret it is very difficult to predict nowadays. And something that I feel a bit of a broken record every time I do a webinar, I say about business model challenges. So we have a business model of extract, use, throw, and that has to change, and has to change very quickly, not only because the viability of the planet Earth to continue producing and absorbing our waste. The other one is just really what we can do as a business that has lower impacts in the environment, but specifically on climate change. I think there is a lot to do because there is a lack of climate literacy. More on that later. So understanding climate change, we have to understand it in context, right? So it is one of the planetary boundaries, which is this model over here, in which you have a green part of the Earth where the safe system of Earth can operate and deliver for what humans we want. And this is standardizing everyone's type of life. However, as you can see in the 2023 graphic, we have actually surpassed several of the boundaries, and climate change is just one of the 6 that we have crossed. So we have to start thinking what we can do different as individuals, as organizations, to have less impact on planet Earth. Concentrating on the ISO and climate change in management systems, I have a little video for you all.
Climate change is seen everywhere. It includes significant impacts and risks arising from changing weather patterns, rising sea levels, and increased extreme weather events. International standards are increasingly recognized as an essential part of the climate action toolbox, as they can help transform climate plans and commitments into effective and measurable action. ISO and its members are committed to aligning international standards with climate action, and formalised their commitment in the 2021 London Declaration to support the Paris Agreement. They are collaborating globally to ensure that existing and new standards are climate aligned and are committed to providing useful tools and frameworks to help standards developers take account of climate change. The ISO Climate Change Coordination Committee, together with experts from across ISO committees and member bodies, have developed ISO Guide 84/2020, a freely available resource that outlines a framework for addressing climate change impacts, risks, and opportunities in the planning, drafting, revision, and updating of ISO standards and other deliverables. ISO Guide 84 has already been used in the development of several significant international standards related to climate change. It provides general principles, a structured process, and different approaches to guide standards developers in including provisions and considerations for climate change adaptation and mitigation in their standardization work. It also includes examples and points to other relevant standards and tools that can be useful to address climate elements of standards. Many countries are already using standards to develop consistent approaches to tackling emissions, improving efficiency, reducing fossil fuel use, and measuring progress across their economies. Relevant parties are contributing to various technological developments to transition to carbon neutrality. By using ISO Guide 84 to educate standards writers on the important role of standards in climate-related policy, strategy, capacity building, communications, and stakeholder engagement, national and regional standardization bodies can further advance these trends by promoting the development of climate-aligned standards. ISO has also developed net zero guidelines to clarify the concept of net zero, provide principles and recommendations for implementing the net zero approach, and lay the foundation for accountability mechanisms and consistent reporting to accelerate the transition to zero carbon economies. Placing standards at the centre of climate strategy will help to measure, report, and verify actions and attainments, bring accountability, and instill trust in those responsible for worldwide efforts to address climate change.
All right, here we are. So the ISOs try to support climate change through including in the standards demand, or sometimes, a request for evidence. And that is quite important. Some of the standards themselves, like the energy standard, will help organizations to become more effective at it. And by being more efficient, you're using less energy, so demanding less natural resources to produce it. Now, so the ISO has actually mapped their impact against the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are part of the Paris Agreement 2015, and binding agreement signed up till now about 166 countries, in which they actually compromise themselves to deliver in all these objectives that you can see on your screen. No surprisingly, the biggest impacts of the ISO, which are aimed at business and organizations in general, is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and then also the responsible consumption and production. So they have mapped what are the standards that they have and what are they doing for the SDGs. So they have obviously set social, environmental, and economic objectives for each one of the companies. And most of the standards will deal with that in many ways, but trying to think from eco-design of products to the life cycle of a service. Here are all the guides that you can access. Now, don't get disappointed if the guides are too general, because the standards have to fit so many sizes, so many situations, so many jurisdictions. Their language is very neutral. However, you as a company, you as an organization, should know what are your impacts. And that's why it's so important, the piece on climate literacy. Let me give you some examples. 14001, the Environmental Management Standard, in February this year, they actually request now evidence to to show that you're doing something for climate change and what is your path to net zero, not in those so many words, but you can actually make it as a risk for the company and then follow it. The series of 14,000 have natural capital accounting, climate change accounting, carbon neutrality. Then you have from the series of 50,000, making buildings more energy efficient. And you have one that we work a lot in the IIRSM, which is risk management. So what are the strategies that you will find in an ISO? So eliminate decarbonization. That's the ideal strategy, isn't it? If you can do it, if you are actually possible for your organization to do it, well, go for it. Then you have mitigation strategies. Mitigation strategy says, how can I reduce my impacts on climate change? And you put the strategies and objectives into place and you follow it. Adaptation is when you don't have an option. You actually need to continue working as usual because there are no others. So certain industries will find very difficult to mitigate. For example, fossil fuel companies. If you ask any of these companies to actually mitigate, they can probably do something, but because the core business is burning fossil fuels to produce diesel, petrol for cars and planes to move, or logistics to work, and plastics for wrapping cucumbers, is very difficult for them to change their business model. However, they could try to diversify and invest in new products and services. Compensation is another mechanism. Many people use them when they travel. They pay for some credits where they plant trees, or they put social or environmental projects that will help people in less advantaged communities. And this is very important, the social justice aspect of it. They require a staggered transition. You cannot demand certain countries and organizations that have less power and less resources to do it, to actually do at the same speed the richer countries or more advanced economies have the opportunity to. We spoke about supporting techniques in that video. Here I just put a few of them. The basis is this: all ISOs require you improvement year on year. Even if it's very little, they require you improvement. It's not that you're going to lose a certification for not improving, because in some cases, you know, for whatever reason, something may happen that you cannot improve in certain indicator, but that doesn't mean that the attitude, the systems, the processes and procedures, or the objective to improve is not there. So one of the big ones is GHG accounting, greenhouse gas accounting, where you can actually account your impacts towards climate change. You can do life cycle assessments where you analyze the inputs, outputs, and byproducts of your products and services. You can do a value chain analysis in which you understand where your products come from, what are the raw materials that come from, what are the processes, what is the level of energy, wastage, water that you use for those products. And then you have the science-based targets in which you publicly compromise your organization to achieve certain targets. You will do that in a scientific basis with mathematic measurements, and you will produce a report for that. And entering the last part of my presentation is the major challenges. Cost. To revert what we have done until now, McKinsey calculates that globally, governments, companies, etc., we will have to spend something like 9.2 trillion a year. By 2030, if we start now, we will start seeing the impact benefit of it. By 2035, major polluters will start seeing return on investment on monetary terms. So this report is quite interesting. It's quite short to read. I recommend it. The poorer countries are impacted the worst, and it will be much more difficult for them to decarbonize. However, it's more possible for them to mitigate and adapt. And then high emissions products or operations will receive a big fluctuation on demands, cost, and the level of employment. And the additional upfront cost that we have to pay right now, the McKinsey report says, will actually benefit everyone or globally by 2035 onwards. So this is an opportunity for new businesses, for new regulation, for new business models. And for that, there has to be a lot of investment to understand what is the net zero transition and how to make it happen. Implementing climate change within an ISO, you will have the big piece of literacy, then changing from short-term focus into long-term focus. And the cost of implementation will be also something that will vary between organizations. As I say, the most polluting industries will have a harder time to reconvert into what we need them to be. And carbon and climate change literacy is very important for every company. There are a lot of courses out there, very short ones usually, where you can actually understand, and then doing the exercise inside of trying to understand what are your emissions and the impact they have on climate change. Summing up, we need to become net zero to stop climate change from happening and all the adverse effects that we're going to receive from it as a civilization and on the planet. We will change a lot as a planet. In 2050, I hope we are able to take responsibility like adults and change things about the way they're done. And then you have the ISO management systems that support this transition. You should include those objectives, you should include those strategies, processes, procedures, etc., into all the nitty-gritty of your organization to be able to manage those impacts. And keep abreast of all the guides that ISO presents. They have some interesting information for most companies. Deploying ISO standards, I know, is not without its challenges, but this is one of the things in which we can help to improve the impacts of organizations. And the carbon literacy challenge is something that we all have to observe. Now, mind you, the leadership in many organizations are the ones that make this happen. And that's why we invited today Kate Wright, the Group Sustainability Director from DFS. And I want you to introduce her, one of amazing examples that I came across in my work life. So Kate, the stage is yours. I'm gonna manage the questions here in the webinar chat and the Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Nico. Hi, everybody. I'm going to take you through a few different topics today, but fundamentally, I want to talk to you about the problem that we had to solve, which is how do we build ourselves a roadmap to our net zero ambition? And I'm going to talk you through why we decided to use a leadership program, how we set it up for success, and then what were some of the outcomes that it delivered. But before I do that, let me just explain who DFS Group are. Yes, I'm in Australia, but it is a UK business. I usually am in the UK. We are the UK's leading furniture retailer. We have about 170 stores across the UK. We are a made-to-order furniture business. We do sell a little bit of stock, but predominantly we make everything to a customer specification. And we are vertically integrated. So we have our own logistics business. We produce around 25% of our own product, but we also do outsource across a lot of different suppliers across the globe. I will stress that also we are a publicly listed company. So within the UK, that comes with quite a lot of legal obligations in terms of reporting. We do a lot of annual reporting. And we're also, being in the UK, legally obliged to address our carbon footprint and meet the 2050 challenge. Every UK business is required to do that. I will also state that we are 14,001 certified across the group, and we do follow quite a few of the different ISO and BSI standards. So we're well familiar with the framework. And I will just also do a bit of a brag moment. We have just been named a climate leader by the Financial Times, which was really great validation and incentive for the business to continue on the journey we're on. So just to take you back to the beginning where we started, we launched our sustainability strategy with something called the SOFA cycle, hinting of the direction that we were planning on going in, but we didn't really start talking about it in terms of circularity. What we use this for is an engagement tool to make sure that every single part of the business and our extended value chain understood where their impact sat in our product life cycle, in our customer journey, and making sure that they were all engaged in the conversation, make sure they were really clear about, what we had to address, the size of the challenge. And we really used this framework as a tool to get them all to the table and have a conversation about their contribution to our environmental footprint. We then also made sure we had some really robust data. Obviously, Nico stressed that point in his presentation, that being able to measure an impact is so critical, because how do you know you're making progress of reducing your impact if you can't measure your journey along the way? So we've been calculating our carbon footprint. We did a retrospective job back in 2021, and we're all the way back to 2019, and we've been calculating our full carbon footprint since that date. We use the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the most common method. And in our last calculation, it became abundantly clear, well, all of our calculations really, that it's our product that is creating our carbon footprint. So about 60% of our carbon footprint is derived just from the raw materials that go into making our products. Then there's the manufacturing process, the shipping, the packaging. And so about 84% of our total scope 3, if you're familiar with the model, you understand that majority of the value chain sits within our scope 3 footprint. Our energy usage, our direct energy usage, so on deliveries and the energy we use to power our buildings, they sit within scope 1 and scope 2. And that's relatively small for us. In many businesses, it's far larger, but for majority of retailers, certainly, the majority of the footprint sits in scope 3. Now, what's interesting is that's considered indirect emissions and outside of your control, but you still have to account for them as though your own footprint, because you're engaging in that part of the value chain, which makes it exceptionally challenging. There are very few businesses in the world that would admit that they've got a great plan on how to tackle their scope 3 footprint, but that was the challenge that we needed to solve. So when we looked at it, because the majority of our footprint is from our raw materials, we really had to address how we're going to tackle this. And we really came back to, we could implement as many recycled materials as we possibly could. We could make sure that all of our timber was responsibly sourced. All of these things would contribute to reducing our carbon footprint, but not enough to get us to net zero. What we really need to do is figure out a way to make sure that we were reusing our product for as long as possible, and that we could figure out a way to recycle and reuse the materials, whether it be in our own products or somebody else's products, at the end of the product life. However, we have a lot of barriers in making that happen. Within the sofa, obviously, the raw materials that we're using, they're almost valueless. They have very little financial value when we purchase them, but almost none by the time they're actually made into a sofa. The value of a sofa comes in the design, in the manufacturing process, the delivery. You know, getting a product to a customer is challenging, but also just running a retail business, that's the value of the sofa. And there's also no demand then to recycle those materials because they have such low inherent value. Additionally, we have some challenges within the UK from a legislative point of view. So we're required to apply a fire retardant to all of our products, which actually contaminates the materials themselves, which means that even if we could extract them at the end of life, we've got a chemical barrier, which means that they become even more worthless. And actually, there's very little infrastructure set up to be able to enable bringing the product back in. Would have a financial impact on the business. So we've got lots of different problems that we're trying to address in terms of creating a circular business. Now, I'm very fortunate in that I work in a business with an incredibly engaged CEO. He has invested a lot of time with me so I can help him understand our environmental impact, what it means for the business, what the ambition needs to be of getting to net zero, why it's so critically important. But what I needed was a real trickle-through effect. I needed every tier of the business, the leadership teams, the future leaders of the business, to really understand the scale of change that was going to be needed to deliver that ambition. So that's what we came up with, is he was trying to figure out how to make sure that he was doing his job in creating future leaders. He considers that an absolutely inherent part of his role as CEO. We use a leadership framework within our business called FED by Stephen Radcliffe. It's all about setting a future vision, engaging the people in the business who are going to make that happen, and then delivering on that vision together. And so that's what we created. And we agreed that this would become our business case in developing a leadership program. So there were 12 people in senior roles across the business who had been identified as the potential leaders of the business in the future. And the CEO was personally going to invest his time in helping grow these leaders and wanted a business case that they could apply the skills that they were learning. He also really liked this as a business case as it would help them build a skill set around climate literacy, as Nico referred to, which is so incredibly important because I cannot think of a single job in future where climate literacy will not be part of a role. Driving sustainability touches on every single part of an organization. So it's inherent that leaders do understand this material. And the CEO really understood this. And so what we wanted them to do is co-create the solution of circularity for our business. So it involved briefing them, helping them understand the problem, and then getting them to come up with a solution, work together collaborative, drawing on all the different skill sets. I spent a lot of time with all of them, making sure they really understood what we meant by certain key terms of greenhouse gases and net zero, and also what a circular business model would look like. And then the idea of this is because they've come up with the idea, they will make sure that it is implemented. They will be so invested in the solution that they've created that they will continue to drive that forward, that part of that delivery piece. So I'm going to take you through some of the tools that I used to embed this and how it went about. So this is a graphic that I love to use to illustrate the need and the urgency of climate change. This is a work called Climate Stripes, which has represented the global temperature, the average temperature across the globe since the 1600s when it was first started to be recorded. And as you can see there, there's a small band, 1971 to 2020, just to illustrate how much the temperature has changed in recent history. And this is quite a powerful graphic because it makes everyone take a deep breath and go, oh, God, this is a real problem. And then what I do is like to actually point out just how capable we are of figuring out solutions to problems. And what I like to refer to as exponential change. And I use this graphic, although it is alluding to some of the problems that we've now dug ourselves into, it does illustrate human ingenuity in that we've managed to move from Easter morning on 1900, we had horse and cart. And if you think about the infrastructure that was involved in living in a world of horse and cart, you had to have stables, you had to have feed for the horses, you had to have someone to deal with past manure and the farriers to shoe the horses. And in the space of just 13 years, that was completely replaced by the automobile, in which you needed petrol stations, you had to create road rules, you had to teach people how to drive, you had to have mechanics to service vehicles. That scale of shift within just 13 years illustrates how quickly things can evolve. What you need is momentum. And that's what I was trying to instill in this leadership cohort is we just need to start. We won't have the right solution straight away. We won't get all of it, but we need to figure out a plan and we need to get some pace behind it. So then what I'm talking to them about is exactly what is the brief that we're asking them to do. Now, we did choose to keep this quite contained. We asked them to develop a commercial proposition that would drive sustainable performance. So that's a really important ingredient of making sure that we were thinking about the revenue and making sure that we're delivering for our shareholders and all other stakeholder groups, but we're doing it in a way that would enable us to meet our net zero ambition. And we gave them the clue. We did say we need to become a circular business. I took them through what is we call it old reality, but it's a current reality still. We're working towards it, of a take, make, waste model that Nico referred to, where we manufacture a sofa, we sell it to a customer, we ship it to them, and then it's their problem to figure out what to do with it. And it inevitably usually ends up currently now in incineration, as it's required in the UK. But we need to figure out a way to make sure we're bringing that product back into our business. We're doing a refresh, repair, we're making sure we've got finding a new life cycle for it multiple times over. but making that commercially profitable as well, making sure that our customers understand the what and the why, and engaging in it as well. So what I did was I used quite a few proof examples. I did an interview with Nellie Cohen, who set up circularity at Patagonia. Obviously, great case study in and of itself. It's a bit of the proof. And then also talked about, the actual model of how do you extract value out of raw materials? What are the methodologies? And obviously, there's lots of refresh and refurbishment programs with mobile phones and other technology. And I was just trying to illustrate here with this model a comparison of how the raw materials maintain value if you treat them in a different way. And then what I did was set up the right mindset of laying out all the different stakeholder groups and some of the things that they might be thinking of, and how you come at a problem from lots of different perspectives. And this proved to be really, really powerful in trying to build out an approach to solving this issue. So, for example, we are the market leaders in the UK. The idea that we could become the equivalent of a Blockbuster or a BlackBerry or a Kodak, that market leader that failed to read the pace of change and lagged behind and became irrelevant. That idea of a threat is very much an inside-out approach of thinking about what's our problem that we need to solve. And then the flip side of that is, well, we've got customers who, yes, they might like our brand today, but they've got changing expectations. Certainly the new generations, the Gen Zs, the Alphas, they expect brands to have solutions to this and to be doing something about it. And if we're not meeting those consumer expectations, they're going to go and find a brand that does align to the values. I also mentioned we've got some legislative requirements, so we need to make sure that we're meeting those. But also we've got suppliers outside the business who find it really hard to change. But as market leaders, can we shift an entire industry to move in the right direction? Now, out of the cohort that we had within our leadership program, we had the head of the fleet, a logistics fleet, we had our IT director, we had our head of procurement, we had property services. So this group had a very different and diverse skill set. But by giving them a common problem, they could all bring their different perspectives to try to solve some of these challenges. By asking these questions, each one of them responded to different aspects. Some really latched onto the legislative part. We have a retail director and a commercial director in this cohort who really understood what the customer needs were. And they could all feed in and share different ideas on different with different mindsets. So how do we do? It actually worked. We have come up with a new circular business model with lots of different facets to it. It involves a customer package to help incentivize and change their mind about the value of the sofa that they buy, and incentivize them to bring it back to us with a trade-in, a guaranteed trade-in. We are launching resale models online, offline for different customer groups. We've got a whole refresh and repair program. We're redesigning how we actually make our sofas in order to make sure that that is economically viable. And we're also making sure that our products are dismantleable so we can recycle the materials at the end of life. Obviously, we can't solve some of the legislative barriers. We're using different channels to try and tackle those as well. But we have pitched these ideas to the CEO, to the COO, to the leadership team, and they've bought into it. So this is now live for us as a business. We are investing time and energy and resource into making all of these happen. And it is built into our net zero strategy and to our science-based targets, which we have now submitted to SBTi, which is a not-for-profit body who validate corporate plans around net zero, which is incredibly powerful and useful. So just to conclude, I really like the ISO framework. This plan, do, check, act is quite a useful mechanic, regardless of which ISO standard you're trying to work for. And some of the principles that we've applied in terms of making sure that you've got your stakeholders involved, making sure that you're looking at all the different systems and outcomes, that looking at all the different aspects, make sure that you've got really clear objectives and key results. So setting KPIs isn't always helpful because it can be very finite. Whereas if you're just looking at the objectives, and progress in this space is not linear, you can go up and down as Nico referenced. But I think the most powerful thing here is positivity, and that once you demonstrate success and change, even if it's small, it inspires and motivates people to keep driving everything forward. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Kate. So I'll take the screen for a few more seconds just to talk to everyone about my company, Hillman Associates. I'll do 3 slides about it, and then we'll go with the questions that we have already, quite a few piling up. So we are a health, safety, environment, quality consultancy. We work, we have an office in London, one here and one in Singapore. Sorry, here is Switzerland. I'm flying over Zurich. I give it as a given. Then this is some of our clients. We work in many aspects of it. Climate change is part of it. And the net zero is a big thing now for many of our construction companies in the UK and Netherlands. So that is something that many people haven't backed on, and they are figuring it out. I think Kate is very much ahead of the pack in all what you're doing, because yes, you're looking at the impacts and you're understanding how things have to be done to just not go out of the times. We have something very important, that is the e-collars. The e-collars is behavioral safety. We take, certain personality indicators, and we make teams work better. But especially we think about what is the impact in health and safety when you're doing that, and the risks that it poses in the business to not have a cohesive team. This is now even rolled out in the Ministry of Defence in the UK, schools. We're going through different companies that have to change their business model. And yes, if you want to be ahead, just call us to do this. Now, next meeting will be the 12th of September for the European branch. Is details to be shared around. It will be a security webinar led by Alison. And now, yes, let's go with the questions and answers. You actually have a lot, Kate, for you.
Okay.
So let me, okay, so here in the Q&A, there's nothing, but they are in the chat if I achieve it to open. Here we are. Okay, so the first one, I think, in general is from Miwa. Can you please clarify what exactly is net zero? So net zero, you want to do it? Do it.
No, I have to use
it. Go for
it. So net zero is trying to abate all the emissions that are caused by your business, whether it be within your own operations or through your value chain. Now, when I say abate it, it's just ensure that you're not contributing more emissions into the atmosphere, which is why you calculate them on an annual basis. Net zero is ideally that you've abated all of them. We're working to the Science Based Targets Initiative standards, which means you need to get to 90% as a minimum of reduction of your own footprint, and then you can offset through an offset scheme the remaining 10%. I would caution that don't use that as a fail-safe to catch things, but it is very likely that certainly within our business we'll find it is impossible to remove every single emission. So that's basically what net zero is. It's how do you get yourself to reduce your emissions as much as possible.
Correct. And then you're using the science-based targets. Companies that they are not using them because maybe it's not attainable for them may have to go into bigger chunks of compensation. Now, compensations, if they are well invested, they are actually very positive as well in social impacts and environmental impacts in different measures. So yes, net zero has that kind of, because there have been a lot of, with the sustainable aviation credits and so on, there have been a lot of discussion in the last few months. Next one. What was it difficult to work with suppliers to gather the data?
Yes, it's very, very difficult. I spend a good 60% of my time engaging with the supply chain, educating them. So I could have done this webinar on a completely different engagement strategy that we did, talking to all of our suppliers, educating them on what do we mean by carbon, how do we calculate a carbon footprint, enrolling them in the idea of creating their own net zero strategy. It is really difficult, particularly when you're working with an industry such as upholstery where they haven't really evolved in the last 100 years.
Right.
So yes, it is really, really challenging.
So I assume the leadership that you're offered by your CEO is quite different to the experience that some of these suppliers may be having themselves within themselves, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The other question is as well, what is the percentage of business that DFS represents for them, and if they have the incentive to change? Do you find any barriers on that?
You would think there are a lot of parallels in terms of our scale of impact on their bottom line to the engagement that we get, but it doesn't necessarily correlate. A lot of it comes down to the attitude of the leadership at the top, which is why the leadership program is so important. We've got some suppliers where we are 90% of their business, and we've got others where we're 2%. And if the leadership is already thinking along the same lines, where we're 2%, there might be a dot and they'll say yes tomorrow to whatever we ask for in terms of changes. Whereas a business where they're, absolutely reliant on us might find it very hard to pivot and change because they've not structured their bottom line to adapt, to move with us. They might not understand why we've chosen to go in that direction. So it doesn't necessarily correlate. It's more about the individuals we're dealing with, which is why I go back to engagement is key in everything to do with sustainability.
All right. We have here Alison that is asking, I recently tried to give away an old but good leather sofa in the UK. It was very difficult to find someone to take it. How do you suggest we encourage people to want recycled or reuse rather than new items?
It's a really big challenge. So I hate to say it, but there are lots of charities. Furniture poverty is a massive issue within the UK. There are lots of charities if you wanted to give it away. Although I respect that if it's a good quality sofa, you might be trying to look for a way to actually sell it. And then
she wanted to give it away, she says here, yeah.
Okay. No. There are so many charities you can give it to. British Heart Foundation is probably the most obvious because they will come into your home and collect it for you. Obviously, getting it out of the space is very, very challenging. But I would really suggest looking at local councils because, furniture poverty is a problem across the entire UK.
Right. Well, I think, more the focus on people wanting new items rather than second use or second hand, whatever. I think that is an attitude thing that we have as consumers, right? If you know that it's new, it will work. And you may not think that something that was built properly may go on over time.
Yeah. So I can tell you, certainly we've done lots of customer research to understand the barriers about accepting secondhand. It's what we call the ick factor. There's people feel, it's very strange. People who go and sit on a sofa in a hotel or, sit on a chair that's been used by 1,000 people on an airline or on a bus. But when it comes to the product they want in their own homes, they want it to be fresh and made specifically for them. So there's actually a piece of work that we need to do in terms of making people comfortable with the idea of a refresh and repair service that makes it almost like a used approved equivalent to a car. It's been serviced, it's been refreshed in such a way that it has taken any of that previous owner impact away from the product. And that is partly what we're doing in terms of our product redesign, whether it be recover, putting new cushions, make people feel comfortable with them.
Yeah, certainly. So it's very interesting, when many people after the Second World War or during emigrated to the Americas, they used to bring their furniture, their grand pianos, those things that they were the heirloom of the family. So it is always more difficult to refurbish something rather than build from new. How do you cope with the variety and challenges involved?
Really careful planning. This is a really good example of systems thinking, that you have to break down every single part of a process and challenge yourself to think about it differently. So we've gone back right through looking at our entire value chain. We research every single material we use back to farm, forest. We challenge the value chain to look at whether or not there is a way to integrate recycled materials into it. If we're then bringing the product back into the business, we're really challenging ourselves in terms of, right, what problems need to be solved here to make it resaleable, to encourage a customer to take it again. We dedicate shop floor space and the skills of our retail team to making sure that they're communicating it properly to a customer. It's really, really, really challenging.
All right. And I have a last question that is very controversial. Are you seeing your market position improve as a result of the efforts you're putting on this? Has it been cost effective, or is it the right thing to do?
It's really difficult to pinpoint it to a single thing that we do, because obviously we're a retail business, constantly evolving and changing our proposition. And I would also just add that the wider macro landscape that we're operating in is very, very challenging in the UK at the moment. So we've gained market share, but our profitability at the moment isn't great, but that could be due to other external factors. But we're definitely earning brand equity as well. We're attracting new customers based on the work that we're doing. So if you take those intrinsic values, those non-tangibles, then it's definitely a valuable and profitable part of the business. Yeah.
Okay, I know we're over time, Kate, but I have a very interesting question that just came in.
Okay.
Is the income levels and social status acting as a barrier in resale and refurbishment? For example, people who are well off but would consider it below their status to buy a refurbished sofa set?
It's a really interesting question. Actually, the research that we've done with customers is no, it's not necessarily an income question. It's an attitude and a mindset question. So what we found that was actually due down to life stage, those who are a bit more mature and had already had a family, were moving more to be an empty nester, they were far more reserved about the idea of resale, whereas certainly someone who was starting a new home or had a young family, expected their children or their pets to potentially trash the sofa, were very open to the idea of actually buying something secondhand and understanding it had a finite life cycle with them, and love the idea that, you know, once they were done with it, they could take it or have it taken away and they could get something else new. It's all about customer mindset, not necessarily just pure financial demographics.
Yeah, and the impact of climate change is that if you take something that it has been previously loved and it has been cleaned and brought back to your house, you have less impact into the planet. So definitely on that note.
I'm not sure customers think about that, sadly. So that's something to work on.
Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. Thank you so much, Kate, for your presentation today and showing how your leadership is changing and including these at all levels. It is super interesting. And I beg everyone a good rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.